Dale.
Okay, Jose Luis, offer a short introduction. So the idea behind these series of interviews, because this is the first of hopefully several or many, hopefully, is to get back together with other architects who do sustainable design, like we do, and see how they have been going on for the past 15 years, because that's how long since we finished our masters together. So I wanted to catch up with different people that went back to their respective countries or not, but they're just spread out throughout the world, and see how they tackle this issue of sustainability, because I'm sure that we take for granted what sustainability means to each other. I'm sure we're not speaking about the same thing every time we're talking about sustainability, and I think that this is a great opportunity to just discuss precisely that. So with that in mind, my first guest, volunteer today, is Jose Luis Barros. Jose Luis graduated from the Pontifical Catholic University of Ecuador and Master in Architecture from the Architecture Association in London. That's where we met, incidentally. Specializing in sustainable architectural design and energy efficiency. He has developed his professional experience across various practical areas of architecture and urban planning at different stages of project development, ranging from design, construction, and public management in urban planning and urban development to academic research projects. Notable among his contributions are projects of different scales and typologies, including his role as superintendent in the construction of the new Quito airport in Tababela. Sorry for that. Additionally, he has experience in the development of residential and medical projects in the United Kingdom. In the public sector, he served as the Metropolitan Director of Urban Development at the Secretariat of Territory, Habitat and Housing from 2016 to 2019. His primary responsibilities included developing and designing regulatory and urban management tools, urban planning regulations, sustainable building codes, public spaces, built cultural heritage, and network infrastructure in public spaces. Currently, he practices independently as a consultant in architecture and urban planning, developing projects at various scales. He is also the co-creator of Ciudad Micrófono, a podcast aimed at fostering discussions on urban topics with a multidisciplinary approach. I always have a problem with that word. We're going to touch on that, Ciudad Micrófono, in a minute. Jose Luis, welcome.
Thank
Thank you
you
for being
very
here.
much, Pedro. Thank you very much. I'm very, very happy to see you after a long time. I mean, it's been 15 years and it went very, very fast. And
Yeah,
I think it's a very nice initiative to catch up and see what everybody is doing and what we
I
can do.
agree. I agree. And
Yeah.
I think it's interesting because from what I see, you seem to be very, very busy. Now, we're having a technical issue. Give me just a minute. Up. Up. Yep. Virtual link. There we go. Okay, so I wanted to start off where we left off, actually, with the masters. And in the masters, we went very deep, I feel, in certain issues. Particularly, what comes to mind is this notion of comfort, thermal comfort, to be precise. I studied that somewhat in Buenos Aires when I was doing architecture, because there the program involved something, well, a good not technical knowledge on air conditioning. So we learned how to read a psychrometric chart and so on, but we never linked this thing of a sensation of thermal comfort as in the adaptive sense, as we learned in the masters, as in terms of you can increase your tolerance if the architecture is good, for instance, or if you're not mandated to stay in one space, that kind of thing, how that can actually mold and shape the architecture around it. I think that was interesting and something I had never seen until I saw it in the masters. But then the sad part is that I never saw it again since I finished the masters, and I never had myself, at least, the opportunity of really applying this. What I'm hinting at is that I think that the masters is, and what we learned, and correct me if I'm wrong. This is I'm getting to a question. Give me a minute. Um, what I'm hinting at is that what we learned immersed in academia was just far from what is happening actually in the development of projects in the commercial world. So merging these two together has been something of a challenge for me for the past 15 years. And this is where I leave off on the question. What is your experience with this? Have you been able to apply certain concepts that we have been learning and we learned throughout the masters? Have you had the opportunity, because you work also in bigger projects? You mentioned the airport, you work as a consultant, you work also for the city. Have you had the chance to offer this knowledge on different scale projects? And this is where I leave it to you.
Well, this question I could answer in, let's say, two stages. Uh, in one hand, I had the opportunity to work for the municipality of Quito, and actually uh, my involvement in this work was related to the development of legislation was that was meant to at the beginning it was meant to, as a incentive for real estate uh, real estate industry. When I got to the municipality, I introduced this, let's say, this part of sustainability as some of the parameters that these buildings should apply for these incentives. And in this case, I was able to introduce as a part of this legislation uh, this form, or let's say this way to achieve in a certain way sustainable buildings in the center of Quito, or as a form of an incentive for real estate industry. So, in one hand, I had this opportunity of developing legislation, and on the other hand, once I was out of the municipality, I could apply these principles as a consultant. So I worked for some of these construction companies, uh,
Sorry for that.
developing all the let's say the, the files and the simulations for uh, these buildings in a way that I could apply all the things that were developed as part of the legislation in real buildings. So I had, yes, somehow I could, let's say, merge this experience that we learned in the masters and, let's say, put in practice in real life. However, I think is in Ecuador, because of the climate conditions. We don't have winters, we don't have extreme hot summers. Uh, in this area, let's say cities like Quito, the
Well,
temperatures are quite mild around the year.
let me draw a parenthesis here and ask you, explain what's the weather like in Quito, for instance? Is it throughout the year? It's the same weather. You don't experience
We have let's say, two seasons: one rainy season and a dry
yeah.
season.
So you have a
Uh,
wet and a dry season. Okay.
yeah, but temperature wise, we have an average year temperature of 14, 15 degrees.
Okay. And how does it fluctuate during the day? Is it really hot during the day and cool at night, or
Let's say that you have a fluctuation around 10 to 8 degrees
okay, so
during the day.
not too much because Quito is quite high up, isn't it? If I'm not
We
mistaken.
are located at 2,800 meters above level sea,
Okay.
theoretically, right? I mean, you
Yeah.
have, I mean, you have a
Yeah.
valley where
Here is
you're
the
a little bit lower in
Now, let me pull you back to what you were saying about legislation. You were lucky enough to intervene in the legislation. Could you draw me a case, an example of how you applied this into one of these legislations in
Yeah, of course. I
some.
mean, I could. I prepared some slides I could show you if you find. I mean,
Okay, normally you
okay.
have the option to share.
Let me see if I can share some of these. Uh, yeah, you can see my screen, right?
I can, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, I
Wait,
if my English is a bit rust, so if something's not clear, just let me know. Okay. Okay. Thing
okay,
is in 2011, uh, it appeared this opportunity in legislation that gave some incentives for real estate industry, right? So the whole idea was if you pay some money to the government or to the municipality, you could build more square meters than the ones that were assigned to a specific plot. Yeah. In 2016, when I was able to get in the municipality, we came up with the team and the people we work with this idea of introducing another layer to this incentive. So you have to pay some fees to let's say buy square meters, and on top of that, we were trying uh, uh, to force in a way that these big buildings that were above 10, 12, 15 floors, um, they were responsible of the environmental impacts that they caused, right? So we use this as principles, general principles to develop this norm. And on top of that, you have the Metro of Quito, the first line of tube in Ecuador, right? So it was a major project. It was a major investment for the city, and it was very important for the public policy to introduce uh, these infrastructure as a part of the urban planning of the city, right? So what happened was as follows. Quito is this, yeah, it's a very long city. We have like 80 kilometers long and 10 kilometers wide, and these small circles were the stations of the new tube, the Metro Quito, were located. So the reflection behind that was this big investment that the city is uh, doing this effort for the transportation, the public transportation of the city, needed to be consolidated in this area. Let's say the urban area of the city. So what we did is uh, we developed like radius in which people could walk from the stations to their homes or their jobs. And with this in mind, we developed like areas where these incentives should be stronger, right? Let's say these blue things were the stations of the Metro de Quito, the tube, and the red ones were the BRT were, like the bus, let's say the public buses were moving, right? So
okay,
with this in mind, with this let's say urban strategy in place, we developed this legislation in three layers. One layer mostly focused on the consumption of water and the treatment of the water after it was consumed. Uh, the second layer was energy. Yeah, and the energy was related first to the actual consumption of energy, and on the other side, the transportation and the energy that represented. And the third layer were a group of environmental, let's say, uh, parameters that the one building should apply, right? There was some points of every layer, and for as much points you get, more stories you can build. Pretty much that's the idea, right?
okay. Wait,
So
can you go back?
yeah,
Can
sure.
I ask you a question? Is this an order of hierarchy as well? Is it more important to watch your water consumption rather than your energy consumption in the city of Quito? Because this is something I was wanting to ask you as well.
Yeah, that's interesting. In a way, it is the fact that energy has two parts: one energy itself and one transportation. Uh, gave transportation, the mobility in the city, uh, let's say, importance over the other parameters. But if you see, water has just one layer of itself, right? That's because, as I told you previously, Quito don't have really problems in temperature and comfort because of the climate conditions. But water is a major problem in the city. Is let's say that in the ecological footprint of the city is the major problem that we have to address in a way so we can, uh, let's say, develop a legislation that is uh, more accurate to the actual problems of the city, right?
Because if I'm not mistaken, in Ecuador, most of your energy comes from the water. It's hydro water, right? Hydroelectrical. You have
It
hydroelectrical
was,
plants.
yeah, theoretically it is like that. Yeah, the most, let's say, most of the energy in the country comes from hydroelectrical power. But recently we have problems with that because the rains are not the same as they used to be. You see, climate change is doing its work, and we are in the need for energy produced by thermal engines for
Okay.
production of energy.
Whether that could be, that could be either fossil driven or okay. Now, looking at this slide again, I see that you have more. Even if the water is more is higher hierarchically. I'm sorry. Yeah. I see that you have more available points for the energy saving than you have for the water in itself.
Yeah,
Is that
that is because in a way we had a problem because transportation is not part of uh, the legislation that controls construction. Yeah, but transportation in Ecuador, this is a problem. I would say even in Latin America, is a huge part of the footprint, the ecological footprint of the cities. So what we did is we divided energy in two parts. This one, which was oriented to uh, tackle the problem of mobility as an incentive uh, for closeness, let's say. You see, so the idea was that these buildings had mixed use in a way that they could have like services, offices, and commerce and stores and stuff, and residential as well. And we did an emphasize on non uh, fuel consumption for the transportation. So we did incentives for bicycles and pedestrian infrastructure, right?
okay?
And on the other hand, we had the consumption of energy itself. Let's say trying to make these buildings do this effort for using equipment and appliances very efficient for lighting and water heating and stuff like that. So let's say this parameter of energy has two stages, two parts. That's why it has a lot of a bit
Okay.
more points about it.
Okay.
Yeah. So basically, the idea is this: as much as an environmental effort you do, more stories you can build. So you have this amount of points. You apply for certain parameters, and as much as your efforts in environmental responsibility, you can buy and build higher buildings. Uh, this this legislation started a boom in the city. So we had an important investment for big real estate company building new in very high buildings, very dense, in the areas where the metro and the public transportation and they have wild services in these areas. Let's say these consolidated areas, and was very well received by the real estate industry. Is the obviously is not for residential single houses. They could apply, but it's not as easy because it's a matter of volume of square meters. I don't know it's understand. And then once we applied this legislation, uh, I wanted to show you some projects I work with applying this legislation.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, this, for example, is a project Harmony. This is a project for a construction company that I did this this as a consultant for them applying this legislation. And it's interesting because they at the beginning they didn't really think about this as an important matter. Sustainability was something that was applied like not something that was say transcendent for the impact of the buildings in the city. But after this, they started to develop conscience about how important it is, right? So this is a building in the
So
center of Quito. Yes.
correct me if I'm wrong, but you're saying more or less that they applied sustainability as an afterthought rather than something from the start. Is that what you're saying? Or
Yeah, in a way they did that, but also
initially?
it was more like initially it was more like that, but also it was like a marketing thing,
Yeah.
It was like
Can I,
a
can I ask you to go
strategy
full
to
screen?
sell a building.
Can I ask you to go full screen on your presentation so that we can see
I'm
your
sorry.
slide? Yeah.
Again?
Okay. So yeah.
Yeah. So this bit it was like these parameters were like 10, 20 parameters, which in whole they summarize like 100 points. You needed at least, let me see, at least 60 points to be able to apply to this incentive. And as much as points you get, you could build higher. That's
So if
simple.
you apply the whole 100 points, which I would imagine is very hard, you are able to build twice as much.
Twice as much, exactly.
So that's the incentive also for them to hire you as a consultant, I would imagine, or
In
someone
a
like
way,
you.
yes. Yes. Yeah.
That makes sense because here, okay, it's interesting what you're getting at. I'll let you now describe Project Harmony, but this is something I wanted to address: how you deal with sustainability there in Ecuador, in Quito, and compare that to how we deal with it here in Belgium, Brussels. Now, I'm going to be honest, and I'm going to say I'm not entirely sure if there are or not schemes for developing this kind of projects, and you get bonuses for sustainability here because I don't build at that scale. I'm not there yet. But what I do see is that in my market, which is single family housing or renovations or that kind of, or maybe up to 10 units, sustainability is seen more by the developer, at least, is more seen as a hindrance rather than as a benefit because they have to pay extra for a consultant who is going to be writing them, asking them to improve the performance, get better materials, add solar panels or whatever. But this is coming out of their cost in order to be able to build from the start. Whilst there, what I see is, look, you can either build less or you can build more, but you get, if you meet these requirements. So it's more seen as a benefit. And I think that that changes. That could be an interesting thing. Now, we still see a problem. I don't think you can apply this in my market, as I said before, in single family housing and renovations. At least I don't see much of that happening. But I see already a difference in the schemes. Okay, please carry on and describe the project Harmony that you were going to show.
Yeah, actually, about what you're saying, uh, the idea was not to develop some sort of sustainable certification or
Right.
something similar, right?
You were not looking for
Because
BRIAM or that kind of
no,
thing. Okay.
that was not the idea. Because exactly because of what you said, these certifications are, in a way, firstly, they are developed for countries that don't have the same environmental conditions as we have and the same environmental problems that we have. So LEED, for example, they have their parameters are very oriented to energy efficiency, considering that they build in environments where summer and winter are a big issue in terms of energy consumption, right? So there are some buildings that tried to apply LEED in Quito and in Ecuador in general, but they face that problem. That firstly, we don't have the amount of uh, materials certified or efficiently enough, so we have to import these materials to apply for LEED, for example. What causes environmental impacts not only of the use of materials that you don't have, but transportation as well, right? And things similar were analyzed in the developing of this thing. So we thought that it might be more efficient if we develop a legislation that is more like an incentive for the major uh, real estate companies. So they are, in a way, responsible for the environmental impacts and the impacts in the mobility of the city that they cause with very dense buildings, instead of forcing them to apply a legislation that didn't give them anything, right?
Right.
And so, in a way,
That's
the
what I find
thing
so
is,
interesting.
we
Yeah.
are we are like you gave them some advantages, some more square meters, in exchange for some payment because you have to pay for this to the municipality, and also by applying some parameters that made them responsible for their environmental impacts, right? I don't know if it's quite clear.
It was. It was.
So that's just one project. For because of the time, I tried not to be so extensive in my explanation. But this building is a building built recently finished in let's say the the economic center of the city, like in the area of high value, the high value of the city. It's a residential building with mixed use. They have uh, commerce in the lower floors, some offices, and they have two fronts. It looks like different buildings, but actually it's the same building, very square, weird shape. But some of the interesting things is that this building reduced, for example, the amount of parking spots uh, compared to other buildings with same characteristics, right? This is because they applied this legislation, and they went in a way made an statement about mobility, right? This is very close to the metro station, to the tube station. So they have very small like units, housing units, without parking spot, so people could move without a car, and they have a lot of infrastructure for bikes and co-working and things like that. So people who live here could stay here or close of their houses uh, for the day in the daily basis, right? For water management, we did a very strong effort in keeping water inside. This is actually because of the urban infrastructure. In Quito, when it rains very hard, right? The rainy season is raining pretty much every day. So you have, I don't know, 50 to 100 millimeters day per hour in some
Wow.
cases. So
And
the,
how long is the wet season? 3 months or is it 6 and
it's
6?
a pretty much 3 to 4 months. Now
Okay.
it's been a bit shorter because climate change
Climate change. Yeah.
is real, but in general it's 4 months, pretty much 4 months. So urban infrastructure suffers a lot during this season, and you have problems of floodings and stuff like that, right? So this building has two ways of keeping the water inside, just for an hour, so they could throw the water after the rain stops, right? Avoiding these impacts in urban infrastructure. So you have lots of green areas. So you have green spaces, like vegetated spaces where you can keep water in the soil, and after they sink into the source of the building, they go to the big tanks. So where they are stored for at least an hour, and after this, you can throw these to the source of the urban infrastructure. This avoids the direct impact of heavy rain seasons
Yeah,
and
I guess
urban
it
infrastructure
delays
stuff.
it. It spreads it out throughout the day. We have similar strategies here. When you're building a build, already in houses, you have to build a water system. But when you build a bigger building, you have to build a basandorage. So like a storm,
Yeah, it's
a
like a storm
storm.
tank.
Exactly. So it
Yeah,
holds the water just so that it buffers it out, so you can slowly start to relieve it afterwards when the city has already dealt with the rain pouring down. I guess.
yeah, exactly. But these are practices that were not very common in this country, in Ecuador, right? Even though we have heavy rains and stuff like that, we suffered from floods in the streets, and recently we had a problem in a neighborhood that got pretty much flooded, all the neighborhood. And but these buildings, it's lots of floors, lots of stories, and imper- they don't allow, because of the size of the plot, they don't allow infiltration, and this is one of the main problems of in urban infrastructure, because it's not ready to hold first 15, 20 floors of people, and rain as well. So not very common. So the building did this effort to keep the water inside using uh, green surfaces and water like storm tanks as well. In terms of energy consumption, we did a very strong effort in using very efficient appliances for lighting and water heating, which is let's say the most important energy consumption appliances in the
Really,
country.
water heating?
Yeah, water heating. Yes.
I, but is that you said it was um, a mixed use building, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. One third,
Because
let's say one, yeah, pretty much one fourth of the building is not residential, and the three-fourths of the building is residential.
water heating, I would imagine the demand for water heating is basically in the residential areas.
Yes, yeah. This building in particular is like the three-fourths of the building is residential,
Okay, okay.
and as we don't have this need for heating or cooling in the spaces, the interior of the spaces. Uh, the most amount of energy consumed is water heating. So we used very efficient heat pumps in the heating of the water uh, for the whole residential. Is like the common heat pumps in this building, and we did an effort for very efficient lighting and other equipments.
Okay.
In terms of urban vegetation, it was interesting because they interact with the heating with the water retainment of the building. So it has lots of areas with let's say green coverage, and either we have like urban agriculture areas in the terrace, right? So people could go there and do some urban agriculture, some communal spaces like for I mean for the residents of the city, for the residents of the building. I mean, let's say I don't really want to get so technical, but uh, we didn't study with all the native species that should be planted in these areas. It's not like grass and some trees, right? It's, because they have an ecological function with the birds and insects that should interact with these species, and what is the amount of vegetation needed for have like an ecological function in the building. It's like a beacon of vegetation that interacts with other species as well. And these are adapted to high altitude, it's 2,800 meters. The conditions are not I mean, not evident because it's like a climate for of a mountain. And finally, we did like studies and simulation of thermal comfort, trying to get into a band of comfort that is acceptable without the need of assistance in heating or cooling of the building.
And
Like
I
tips
guess you
that
achieve
are
that
some
with shading, and shading in Ecuador should be easy, right? If I'm not too mistaken. I mean, the sun is straight up,
yeah. The thing is that we have like
east and
I
west,
mean,
of course,
sun
huh?
is like east and west movement of sun, right? But
Certainly. But then I have
it's
another question
not.
related to that, and that
If you say
is
north and south, it's not as heat as
as
important,
different,
but
right?
the movement is you have like a sun. Half the year is like southeast and south and northwest, and the other half is the other way around, like southwest and northeast.
Exactly.
Yeah, so
That makes sense.
shading is
And
more
this
like should
this
be
brings me
like
to another
more
question I had.
horizontal, right? So,
Sorry, I keep on talking over you. But
no
this
way, no.
brings me to a question I had when you explained Quito, the layout of Quito. That was very interesting. And you said Quito is about 80 kilometers long and 10 kilometers wide. Now, does this mean
Let me show you
uh,
like a
is
3D,
long?
right?
No, but what does long mean? Is it east to west or north east to west, right? Or north to south?
Is west, east west. Like
Long is east to west, and okay. And now
yeah,
regarding
north
this
is here
particular,
is north south. Quito is north south. The axis around along the city is north south. South
so
here,
80
north here.
kilometers you have from north to south, and 10
Yes,
kilometers from east to west.
right.
Okay. Okay. Now,
So you have here the
um,
mountains and over here the valley.
okay. Now going back to your projects and precisely thermal comfort, you say that cooling is something and heating is not required. But what about culturally? I mean, has Ecuador and Quito particularly been affected by this international style of having spaces be extremely cold during the warm period, or vice versa?
I mean, not really. I mean, in let's say that Quito has like a 10-20% of the areas located like in the center of the city. Hola, Pedro.
Sí, sí,
You there? Yeah.
I'm here. Yeah.
And naturally, we don't feel the need for heating or cooling. I mean, it's not a cultural thing that people don't really feel these as needed. In some cases, I mean, you have like small heaters like you get, I mean, in the store, and but it's not important. It's not integrated to the buildings, right? I think, yeah,
Okay.
this is personal. That in a way, uh, the influence of lots of people, young architects studying sustainability in other countries where they learn the needs in different latitudes, and they try to come back to Ecuador and apply these strategies. Not always, it's not always effective.
Ah,
And the same thing happens with certifications. Here, there's a debate for example, the need of certifications like LEED or EDGE. Whereas if you think let's say in effective sustainability, adapted adapted to the context of the country, you might not need this kind of certification or not be as effective as they should.
but because there's a big difference between Quito's requirements in terms of sustainability and what LEED tends to offer, or BREEAM. I mean, I'm not BREEAM. I'm not. I don't certificate BREEAM buildings or LEED for that matter. But as you correctly pointed out, these certification systems come up from northern latitude countries where
Yeah,
the temperatures are far more extreme and the performance of the building is completely different. You said that the highest energy consumption there is water heating. That's
yeah,
basically a joke for me because here it's number one is heating, number two is cooling. In the residential sector, then it varies as you go to the office sector. Now, and we are not even touching upon ventilation because if you don't consume a lot of energy for heating or cooling, then I would imagine I can draw from that you don't have a lot of insulation, and if you don't
no,
have
we
a lot
don't
of
use it.
insulation, then you don't have ventilation either. So literally, your energy consumption is not that significant.
Not in terms of heating and cooling.
So now I understand better why you say that the problems are transport, if I'm not mistaken, and water, dealing with water.
Water management in general, because
Water
Quito
management.
in Ecuador in general, water management for used water for gray water, it's only 2 to 3% of the amount of water produced in the city. So water management is a big problem. And as a high altitude city, the water that we use comes from sources in the mountains as well. And but those resources are just going down very quickly, and we need to go farther to retrieve some water to consume in the city. So those are the real problems in terms of footprint, ecological footprint in the city. Energy is it's really not that as much.
Okay. And can you tell me something about vernacular architecture in Quito? Because I've never been to Quito, sadly. You never invited me over, so I've never been. But
You're very much invited, my friend.
I see like in Argentina and Buenos Aires, I see that the architecture responds to the climate and the energy requirements because they had no other way of getting around that requirement. They simply didn't have the resources, so they had to do with what they could, with what they had at hand. Now, is vernacular architecture also in a way dealing with this water problems? Or probably back in the day, these water problems were not real problems for them. I'm not sure. I'm just asking.
Yeah, well, Quito has an history very interesting because if you talk about vernacular architecture, let's say we have to go back to pre Incas cultures, you know. But the colony and with the Spanish colonization, we assumed a kind of architecture that was brought here for the Spanish, and they used a kind of architecture that used to be built in south of Spain, so very hot weather. Whereas here in Quito, the climate conditions were very different, right? So the historic district, the historic center of the city, is built with this architecture that came from the south of Spain and didn't work very well. It's very cold, very humid. It's not very
Okay.
adapted to the climate.
And it does
Quito
nothing for the
is
water issue.
not really, but because at the time water was a
It wasn't an
public
issue.
resource.
Yeah.
Yeah, it wasn't an issue actually. And Quito was named World Heritage, Cultural Heritage by the UNESCO in 1978. So
Okay.
that this makes kind of uh, kind of difficult to do some changes in the structure of this area, this historic district, right? So it's a very protected area. Buildings are protected, and that makes it very difficult to evolve. So it's a like a touristic area. You can go and visit, but living over there is an issue. It's not easy.
Okay. Well, this all seems very, very interesting. I knew it was going to be different than what we do here, but I had this sense that thermal insulation was not an issue there, but I didn't know it was non-existent to that point.
I always say
Because
that
that
we
changes
build
everything.
like yeah. I mean, thermal insulation is something very very new to this to the construction industry in Ecuador in general. I think it's more like a market issue. It's part of a new ways of construction, new materials, and new technology. But in general, in the mind of the people, in the culture of the Ecuadorians, concrete blocks, concrete slabs, concrete structure is what's really good. I mean,
but
you
that
try
would
to
make
use
sense.
like drywall and insulation. People feel it as a cheap construction.
But that makes sense also because in terms of performance, concrete and these materials that have a high in thermal mass are going to work well in Quito, a lot better than drywall and sheetrock and whatever, and insulation, thermal insulation for that matter. I wouldn't, if I would be living in Quito, I wouldn't be using thermal insulation. I would be using thermal resistance, thermal
It
inertia.
doesn't
Sorry,
make any sense. I mean, some thermal mass is good enough.
I
And
would imagine. Yeah,
if you have, I mean, if your residence, like mine, for example, here where I am now, it faces west, right? So in the morning, if it gets very hot because of the sun, you open the windows, you are at 2,800 meters above level sea. So you are up in the mountain. So you open the window and it cools down very quickly.
but you said it opened. Your apartment faces west, so it's in the afternoon that you get.
The east, but sorry, east.
Ah, okay. I was a bit, I
So
was a
yeah,
bit
my
mixed up
mistake,
there.
my mistake.
Okay, now that makes sense. Or you can just bring down a shade or whatever.
And during the
Shading is a
night,
lot easier
yeah,
than thermal insulation.
during the night, if it's too cold, I mean, you shut the curtains, and that's it. I mean, you close the windows, you get it pull over, and that's as much as you need. And if you have some
Because
thermal mass in the building, it regulates
here
very
might
quickly.
be, or my reflections of what, or my conclusions probably. And I'm not thinking as an architect working here in Belgium, but I'm thinking as an architect coming from Buenos Aires, Argentina. And in Argentina, we don't use thermal insulation either. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't. I believe that we should use thermal insulation. We do use it on the roof, luckily, but we don't use it on the walls. Maybe now with new construction, maybe for the past, I haven't been there working or whatever for the past 10 years, so I'm not entirely sure how it is now. But I'm thinking it's not at the standards it should be. But in Quito, I don't see that as a problem. Quite the contrary, I think what you're doing is exactly right. I think you should be focusing on the water issue because it is your main issue and not in the thermal. And I'm also, another thing that surprised me from this conversation is that this cooling factor or heating factor, you can build without these systems in a high-end building. That's something that really shocks me in a good way because I believe that you don't need air conditioning here in Belgium, for instance. Yet, if you're building a high-end tower, you're certainly going to account for that.
Yeah, actually, is I think I always say this, that we in Ecuador, mostly in Quito, we built like in the 60s,
But that's a
because
good thing.
we didn't have this need for technological evolution of the construction. We didn't need it because of the climate conditions. In that sense, we should improve in technology in things like water management and things like transportation, trying to uh, take advantage the of the services that you have in certain areas that are very well served. Whether it happens that people uh, in this cultural idea of getting more square meters for your family and etc. They try to go farther in the suburbs, buying a house where they are not be able to be like never, because they spend like 1 or 2 hours in transportation to work every day. Whereas I live in the center of the city and I walk everywhere. This is something that's not taken in consideration. And on the other
No.
hand, and I think what happens in Buenos Aires is pretty much the same, is that the speed of the extension of the, the urban, like
Issue.
say, limits issues is so fast, and the local governments are not able to control uh, what happens in the city. So we try
Hmm.
to control everything, and we don't have the way to do that. So, for example, Quito has informal construction sector that is around 70% of the construction a year in general. I mean, if you see the whole city, 70% of that is not formal. So they don't have construction permits or legislation
You
accomplished.
said 70%.
Yeah, it's around 70%.
Well, I just come out, well, not just, I would say about a month and a half ago, I went to see a lecture by Philippe Lam. He's an architect based in Paris, and he recently wrote a book which I read, which is quite a wonderful book. It was called The Natural History of Architecture. He wrote it in French, but I think there's translations now to Spanish and English. And in that lecture, we also had another speaker from, I think the office is called M2A. I should know the office because it's one of the biggest here in Belgium. And the speaker actually said that 1% of buildings is actually built with an architect, which was quite scary to hear as a, because, well, we're talking about sustainability and how we apply it and how hard it is to apply it for us architects. What happens with the other 99% where they don't even try? And even in the 1%, only half of us are trying, I guess,
Mm.
because we don't have the incentives, the other half, at
Put
least.
on top of that, put on top of that uh,
Sorry.
artificial intelligence. I mean, artificial intelligence is something that should be discussed in this matter, because what is the actual role of architects? I mean, let's not say about the whole world of architecture, because you have theorists and designers and everything, but only about sustainability. I mean, very soon we'll have apps and new programs based on artificial intelligence that could uh, design something with sustainable principles. They will not need a professional behind it. People would do it like with an app, like for $10. You design your house and it's already sustainable and it's already taking in consideration sustainable parameters.
Well, you're talking about the disruption of architecture in the future with artificial intelligence. I think we're not there yet, but I think that what could artificial intelligence do is help with more uh, jobs that are, or tasks which are really encumbersome for the architect, which are really not productive for anyone. So what am I getting at here, for instance, and going back to the legislation and the comparison between building in Belgium against building in Ecuador? Ecuador. What I see is, for instance, somebody asked me, or not even before that, if somebody wants to insulate their house, because here, as you know, in Europe, we're not really having a crisis, a housing crisis, in terms of we need to build more houses to house the people, because what we actually do need is to retrofit the houses that already exist, that are already built.
That's
Now,
I mean, in Europe you have this opportunity because of the price of land. You see, uh, but in Latin America, land is still affordable. So people tend to leave their house instead of retrofitting. They go farther and they buy another house.
okay, but that, are you talking about the people when the the,
I mean, I'm
the
talking about middle class.
but are you talking about how a family dynamics, when the children leave the house to buy their own house, they go out and buy a house on the outskirts? Is that what you're saying?
No,
Or
no. I mean, I'm talking about the, our experience in Quito as historic development of the city, right? So what happened is that you have the historic district, center of the city, uh, where the, let's say, middle class families were used to live. In a point, these houses, these buildings, were like outdated, and these people are like a group of social group. They moved to another neighborhood. They built a neighborhood, and they did it again in time. So now people live in the city and go into the valleys in Quito, right? So that leaves abandoned buildings where retrofitting could be more expensive than building a new building,
that makes sense.
right?
Me, as a an architect working in the professional market, I probably charge, well, not me, but everyone charges more for working on a refurbishment than on a new build. But it makes sense because you have to do the project twice. You have to see what's there, analyze it, and then propose something. And then you always have mishaps, you always have surprises. And that's fine. But the issue I was pointing at is, if somebody, if my neighbor, what my other neighbor, if my neighbor wants to insulate her house, she has to ask for a building permit by an architect. And that's encumbersome. That's a lot of work for me. There's a lot of paperwork. And why? Because it changes the aesthetics. So I can understand why she has to go through this process, but I see that process as something that is just too encumbersome if we're going to meet our target demands of 2030 of having net zero energy consumption for the building sector, which is what they want here in Belgium. So, bottom line is, if she wants to insulate her house, she has to go through the same process for an architect than if she wants to double the size of the house. Now, if she wants to double the size of the house, it would be understandable for me to charge a determined fee. But if she wants to insulate her house, where my intervention is merely there to satisfy bureaucratic requirements, I actually have to charge more or less the same amount of money, and that's a big problem that I'm
So
facing here, at least.
so what you're saying basically is that the actual needs for achieving some goals of sustainability in terms of like the architecture and the cities and the whole industry are opposed to the way that the market works.
To the way legislation works, in a way, yes, I think they're coming to a head.
Because
Because
what I think is that the legislation don't necessarily think or take in consideration the way that the market works.
no, for sure, Yeah,
Yeah. And the
that's why
problem is
this is
that
helpful, I
market
think.
is stronger than legislation in many countries.
Okay,
You go
that I can
faster. So
understand.
what I propose in a way, I've been thinking this lately. Uh, what I should, what we should do is trying to find a right product to sell to our clients. So we go in the same direction that the market goes with uh, technical and let's say environmental approach to this, because we are going in the other sense. I mean, we're going completely opposite to the market, and the market works. These 70% of people that work that build their houses informally could be interested in a professional that gives them alternatives more efficient. I mean, I've been thinking about this lately. I
No,
think
but it makes sense
it's a matter to
because
discuss.
we came to this because of artificial intelligence, and I see that artificial intelligence could probably take tasks of my job that would therefore make my intervention for my this lady here smaller, so I can charge less for doing developing the paperwork that needs to be developed for her installation thing. But if I give you an example, and let's give you some numbers. Insulating the whole house would cost somewhere around 40 to 50,000 euros. My intervention as an architect, because there has to be an architect there, would be somewhere around 10,000 euros. And that's not because I'm driving a Porsche, it's because it's a lot of work. Um, so that's where I see that legislation is not following its own demand for one, and the market. Something has to give. And the alternative would be okay, we can insulate from the inside. But if you insulate from the inside, it is, for one, more costly, and two, it's a technical challenge. So if you're doing that without an architect, then good luck. Because I as an architect, I don't want to do it from the inside either. So yeah, because of the risks. But I think that that's already another issue. Okay,
Yeah,
well,
think about.
we can just close it in there, Jose Luis. Thank you again. It was most interesting. I had no idea Quito had such a nice weather.
You are welcome to come here
Um,
and put your practice in here if you want. So
I should drop by sometime off the wet season probably because of what you said. But
it's a
yeah,
beautiful
sounds
country. You will be like.
yeah. Okay. Well, once again, thank you. I don't know if you want to leave anything else, anywhere people can
No,
contact you, reach out to you.
yeah. First of all, thank you very much to you. It's a very. I mean, it's been a pleasure to see you. I see that your family has grown after 15
Yeah.
years, and well, it's a challenge. The practice is a challenge, and it's very nice to share. Maybe thinking, working together in some stuff and writing,
Could
or
be
I don't know.
interesting, but from what I gather, you went further into urbanism rather than architecture. You're doing larger scale projects. You're not doing small houses and apartment buildings like I am.
Yeah, that actually it's been luck. I mean, I always consider myself as an architect more than an urbanist, but life gave me, I mean, sent me in the way of urbanism, and I liked it. But I would like to go back to architecture a little bit. It's more my
Okay,
like
well then we can do something
DNA.
together. I also want to take this opportunity and congratulate you on what you're doing with Ciudad Micrófono. It sounds
Yeah,
like a very interesting thing. I've been watching a few chapters in YouTube. I'm sure you have a podcast as well. For those of you who don't know, Ciudad Micrófono is co-hosted by Jose Luis, and he invites distinguished guests to discuss everything related to urbanism in Quito in
yeah.
Spanish.
The idea was a little, yeah, urbanism and urban planning, but also raise discussion for matters that happen in the city and we don't really discuss about. I mean, there's lots of things of daily, I mean, that we see in daily basis, and we don't talk about with the with the rigorosity that needed. So you're welcome to watch Ciudad Micrófono. It's a podcast that we co-host with a friend and a colleague. It's made in Spanish because it was meant to be more for our country and the people more like related to these things of urbanism. But you're very welcome to see us, and we will put this link for in somewhere in this interview.
I'll put it below in the description once it goes off the live. Yeah.
Very welcome.
Okay. Thanks, Jose Luis.
Pedro, big hug. I mean, hug to your family. I mean, we have to see each other sometimes. Hopefully, this
We do.
year
Yeah.
or maybe next.
Another
Thank you
bike in
for the
London.
invitation, and I hope to be. I hope been in some value this interview.
Certainly you have. Thank you again. Huh? Bye
Big
bye.
hug. Bye.
Thank you all for watching as well. Bye bye.